everyone, and welcome to your history lesson for today. So, should we have a look at the learning objective? As a historian, can I create a fact file about a famous astronaut and explain the significance of their achievements? So, we are going to be, as it says, we're going to be looking into astronauts in particular. I mean, we're looking at the history of space exploration in general, but to kind of streamline our process a little bit and make sure we're not spending all day on this, we are going to focus on one astronaut in particular, okay? And that's going to be an astronaut of your choice. So we're going to be exploring the role of astronauts in space exploration, and your task is to create a fact file on that astronaut that you have chosen, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you some examples on the next page to get you started with ideas. However, I've also linked a YouTube video in Teams. It's about 4.5 minutes long, and it basically gives you a rapid fire run through of all the key events and milestones in the history of space exploration. I think it's a fantastic video, and I would really recommend watching that either now or at the end of this video, okay? Because that's going to really give you some ideas and get you excited about what you could potentially write about, okay? But as I mentioned, I'm now going to share with you some examples that came to my mind. But you're under no obligation to use these. You can use whichever astronaut you want to, okay? So, first one that came to my mind, famous astronauts, is Neil Armstrong, okay? He's probably, I would say, he's probably the most famous astronaut of all time. And he's an American astronaut, and he was the first person to walk on the moon in 1969, okay? Or perhaps you want to focus on Valentina Tereshkova, okay? She was a Russian astronaut, and she was the first and youngest woman to have flown in space in 1963, okay? And she also remains the only woman to have ever been on a solo space mission. So maybe you want to create your fact file on Valentina. Then we've got Yuri Gagarin, and he was a Soviet astronaut. He was the first human to journey into outer space in 1961, okay? So you can see the rate of progress there, can't you? You had the first person going into space in 1961, and then only 8 years later, you had Neil Armstrong walking on the moon, okay? So you can see just how fast things progress in the history of space travel. It was quite extraordinary, that decade in the 60s. There was a huge push amongst the American and the Soviet nations to try and get people into space and explore space, okay? But that's the topic for another day. You don't have to go into too much depth on that, but it's an interesting aspect of what's going on. And then finally, another one that came to mind is Tim Peake, okay? And he's a much more recent one, obviously. And in 2015, Tim Peake became the first British astronaut to visit the International Space Station and conduct a spacewalk. So he's another one. Perhaps you've heard of him. He did do lots of experiments. He did lots of work with children, and he really tried hard to make space more accessible to people who aren't astronauts, obviously, to try and get people engaged and interested in space. So I think he did a fantastic job of raising the profile of astronauts and space in general, okay? So maybe you want to focus on him. Basically what I thought of, I've just given you here are some ideas of things you might want to write about, but it's very much up to you, this. I don't want to be prescriptive and tell you, you must do this and you must have this, okay? This is more for you to explore and to go with what you're interested in, okay? So you might want to include a short biography of the astronaut, okay? So their age, their location, where they live, and what they did before going into space, okay? Sorry, there should be a bracket at the end of that ETC. Apologies for that. All right, but what about a summary of their main accomplishments, okay? Maybe you want to talk about what they did when they were in space. So if it's Neil Armstrong, he was walking on the moon. Perhaps you might want to find out, what did Yuri Gagarin actually do when he was the first person in space? Like, you can tell me about a little bit of detail about his mission, okay? Because all of these people, when they went into space, they didn't go in just for fun. Typically astronauts are scientists, engineers, those types of people, okay? And they have very specific skills, and missions are done with a specific purpose in mind. Because the reason why is because it's so expensive to send someone into space. You don't just do it because you feel like doing it, okay? Maybe one day in the future, once we've got the technology, people can go into space for fun. But right now, you only do it for a purpose, okay? So maybe you can find out that purpose. And why, if you can, try and explain why they were significant in the history of space exploration, okay? So what is it that they did that really, perhaps they paved the way for future people, okay? So maybe Yuri Gagarin, he set the precedent for other people to go into space, and people were like, I guess before they actually truly sent someone, they never really knew whether or not they would survive, okay? Like, it's all very much, you can theorize back on Earth, but until you're actually there, it's very different, okay? So maybe that's what you want to focus on. Maybe explaining it's you know, don't go crazy. You don't have to really go in depth here, but if you can come up with some ideas, that would be brilliant. And then perhaps you might want us to look at what they went on to do after being an astronaut. Okay, did they carry on sort of doing experiments back on Earth? Did they sort of go into something completely different? Okay, it's up to you. Have a think and see. And then the other thing I would say is, it's not necessarily something to write about, but any pictures or drawings you might want to make your fact file more engaging. Okay, you can do this on Word if you like, and you can insert pictures. Now, what I've done is on the next slide, I've included a way that I perhaps might think about laying this out. Okay, so I've gone for Tim Peake. I've got a couple of nice pictures, and then I would have some text. Okay, obviously I didn't write it for you, but it's very much up to you. This, okay, I want you to have some fun with it. Go with what you're interested in, and I'm really excited to see what you come up with. Okay, and perhaps further on, after this lesson, if people come up with some interesting things, we can collate those and we can discuss those. And you know, children, if you want to, we can kind of combine our research and findings, and we can present those to everyone. Okay, so I'd love to see what you come up with, and yeah, by all means, give it a go and enjoy. Thank you very much.